Hi, I'm Jason Alexander, or as you probably know me, Royal Flusher 25 from WSOP free-to-play app. WSOP players, I have some free chips just for you. Go hit the tables like the legends you are. Download the WSOP free-to-play app, where you can win rings and bracelets and tournaments and show them off to everyone at the table.
If you love poker, play poker with 1 million extra chips using this promo code, WSOPFREE1M.
This episode is supported by Merrill. With a dedicated Merrill advisor, you get a personalized plan for your financial goals. And when plans change, Merrill's with you every step of the way. Go to ml.com/bullish to learn more. Merrill, a Bank of America company. What would you like the power to do? Investing involves risk. Merrill Lynch, Pierce, Fenner & Smith Incorporated, registered broker-dealer. Registered investment advisor. Member SIPC.
As you've probably heard by now, we've teamed up with BetMGM this season. We'll be using BetMGM lines to make all of our picks, and we'll have special offers for our listeners each week. If you haven't signed up for BetMGM yet, use bonus code The Athletic, and you'll get a 1-year subscription to The Athletic, plus up to a $1,500 first bet offer on your first wager with BetMGM. Here's how it works. Download the BetMGM app and sign up using bonus code The Athletic. Make your first deposit of at least $10. Place your first bet on any game and claim your voucher for a 1-year subscription to The Athletic. See BetMGM.com for terms. U.S. promotional offers not available in D.C., Mississippi, New York, Nevada, Ontario, or Puerto Rico. Gambling problem? Call 1-800-GAMBLER. Available in the U.S. Call 877-8-HOPE-NY or text HOPE-NY 467-369 in New York. Call 1-800-NEXT-STEP in Arizona. 1-800-327-5050 in Massachusetts. 1-800-BETS-OFF in Iowa. 1-800-270-7117 for confidential help in Michigan. 1-800-981-0023 in Puerto Rico. First bet offer for new customers only in partnership with Kansas Crossing Casino and Hotel. Don't forget, if you haven't signed up for BetMGM yet, use bonus code The Athletic, and you'll get a 1-year subscription to The Athletic, plus up to a $1,500 first bet offer on your first wager.
The Athletic.
Two weeks on after MotoGP race week at Misano comes MotoGP race week at Misano. In the middle, there was a MotoGP test at Misano. This is the Race MotoGP podcast. I'm Valentin Harunji. Regular host Matt Beer is indisposed today, but worry not, you'll be back shortly. But for now, it's just a two-man show, myself and Simon Patterson. And we decided this is a good time to talk about some of the stuff that we didn't quite get to coming out of Misano, and specifically coming out of the test, because it was despite not really having like huge obvious 2025 prototypes like you would have sometimes, maybe some factories more than others, still a very important test potentially for the direction of MotoGP. And let's start with the big one. You know, we've been talking about the prospect of a new Michelin front tire for a while now as potentially the limiting factor in terms of racing, as potentially, you know, not the cure-all MotoGP needed, but something very, very important. Simon, let's just recap. Why do we need a front tire, and does it look like we're getting a new front tire?
So we need a new front tire because for the first time that I can recall, basically, because of a various few factors like COVID and just direction, we find ourselves in this position where front tire development has been surpassed by bike development. The bike development process has jumped way, way past what the front tire is capable of, mainly thanks to ride height devices and aerodynamics, loading the front tire more than it ever has before. Michelin were unprepared for that. Their process of building a front tire takes time. It's not something that happens overnight, and is something that's further complicated, to be perfectly honest, by riders refusing to actually do any testing of Michelin's tires whenever it comes to days like Monday's post-race test, which is why it was made mandatory that they try this new tire. So as a result, we've needed a new front tire that can cope with this pressure, because what we're seeing right now is essentially one of two things in races. Either you have to spend all the time before the race gambling, picking what pressure you're going to have so that it doesn't go way up through the roof or isn't too low that you get penalized, to make sure that people aren't essentially picking up penalties post-race that ruins your race. Or the pressure goes way too high because you either play it safe or gamble in the wrong direction, and it's like riding on glass and you just crash out because there's no front feeling at all. And as a result, people, have been managing these tires during races. We saw, I think most famously, Fabio Di Giannantonio at Assen a couple of months ago, essentially pulling out of the battle because he knew that his front tire pressure was interfering with his performance. So he kind of gave up a position, let it cool down. It also means that people are less confident and less comfortable to pass because it's hard to be a risky, aggressive MotoGP rider on corner entry and put all your faith in a tire that alters based on the pressure.
But it also makes for desperation moves because ultimately, well, on many tracks there's a sort of a ticking clock on how long you can actually follow somebody, and we saw that at Misano in the sprint, for instance. Bagnaia probably had the same pace as Martin did in that sprint race, but at the end of the race he had to give him like a second and a half buffer because his front went to the sky. It's we know why they did it. We know why Michelin introduced it. I know that riders weren't very sympathetic. I know that much of MotoGP wasn't sympathetic, but I understand the fear of having one of your products, a front tire, go pop on national television or whatever in front of millions. I get that completely. Not to mention the obvious safety implications, but clearly it makes for a style of racing that isn't safer and that isn't particularly good to watch. So you don't want people doing clean air management. That's not what you want out of MotoGP. So, simple as it sounds like, as you said, it was a mandatory trial. I think most riders tried it in that 30-minute window. The one who didn't, Alex Marquez, tried it later because he crashed his bike before it, so couldn't do it in that window. But it's a way to make him do it because otherwise, testing time for race riders of most MotoGP manufacturers is incredibly limited, so they're not going to dedicate like an hour to testing out a new tire, something that doesn't benefit them in the here and now. I understand that, I guess, in a way, but it's also that it's not their job. You have to make them. I'm glad they're making them. I would arrange a separate test entirely, but that's expenditure. Nobody wants that, so I get that too. F1 runs Pirelli tests every month with a couple of teams. But clearly, again, we couldn't possibly do that in terms of expenditure. The good news is the feedback's mostly positive. They seem ready, as much as we know, based on a 30-minute window. The intention is indeed to reduce their fluctuation in tire pressure and tire temperature. So all that hopefully will remove the weird pressure games and potentially eradicate the possibility of 16-second penalties changing the outcome of a race you've just seen, which is completely unthinkable. But if you've seen any headlines about this, chances are you've not so much seen them about what it'll do for 2025s in terms of quality of racing. You've seen who really likes the tire because that's, as fans, that's what we're interested in. Who's this going to benefit? Who's this going to screw? I don't know who this is going to screw, but it looks like there's one guy who expects it to benefit himself. That guy is Pecco Bagnaia. Simon, how happy was he?
So I'm really glad that we have the podcast to explain this because obviously we've written the story and everything and it's on the website, but I need the podcast to be able to sell how happy Pecco Bagnaia was about this. This was not a case of he turned up and there was, oh, cool, that's nice. This was like he discovered that it was Christmas on his birthday. This is the happiest. It was almost like manic, delight. He was so pleased. Repeatedly said that this is something that he'd been asking for a long time, that this was exactly what his riding style in particular needed. Alluded to that, everything he felt was what Valentino Rossi had told him the Bridgestone front felt like back in the day. And we know that it was much more focused on a super aggressive, super good front as opposed to the rear where Michelin's always been stronger. And I think most interesting of all is that he did a run on the bike. He did a few laps on the tire and felt so confident that he then in his mind designated 2 corners on the Misano circuit where he could crash comfortably and tried to basically lock up the front and push it as hard as he could through those corners just to see what it would do. And it did what he wanted it to do and didn't crash him and was amazing. So yeah, he was super happy. Other people liked it for sure, but not the same level of like immediate bliss, joy, like religious experience that Pecco had when he tried it. Yeah. The others all kind of tempered their feelings on it a little bit. He did not.
Yeah, I think the other guy who was really conspicuous in terms of liking it for me is Raul Fernandez. I heard him quite positive, but for the most part, I think nobody was like, this is unusable, we cannot go into 2025 with this. But a lot of people were like, feels strange at first. I'm still sort of not convinced by it. Like the word strange came up over and over and over.
Yeah, exactly. Strange was like the one adjective that the majority of the grid used. And it feels like that's because this tire is super, super stable on braking. Whenever you're in a straight line, pulling the front brake, you get so much feedback from it and it just doesn't move. But then whenever you just tip the bike into the corner, there's a moment there where there's very little feeling, where there's very little feedback coming from it. And I think that really unsettled quite a few people. And it's something that they think that it's going to take a bit of time to get used to. But obviously for others whose riding style is much more about making the corner as short as possible, about slamming on the brakes, throwing it in, hoping, what will be, and then accelerating out of it. Like, for example, Pecco, as opposed to someone like Marc Marquez, who's much more about smoothing out the corner. It just works. Out of the bag, it works.
Yeah, so that's a good sign for 2025 for what will be potentially the biggest title fight of Pecco's life, which is a funny thing to say when he's in the middle of one still for his third championship and has already won two. But this will be, potentially mano a mano, we suspect, with Marc Marquez, depending on what happens to the other manufacturers. I'm skeptical that this means like a whole lot, because it is a 30-minute window at a track Pecco Bagnaia loves more than most people on the MotoGP grid. There's a select few who really know Misano, so everybody knows Misano, but there's a select few who know Misano. So, give Mark another couple of hours on it, and maybe he's getting more out of it. And we'll see, we'll presumably see in Valencia, we'll see in the preseason in Sepang and whatever other track they're going to that I don't remember, Thailand, I think.
Yeah.
Good job, Val. But it's a good start. And again, you don't have to go far in MotoGP history to see, tire changes change competitive orders in meaningful ways. After all, it is the stuff that connects the bike to the ground. It's kind of important.
It's kind of the most important thing.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, that's the reality. That's what it comes down to. It is the single most important component. And it's the one that's out of the team's hands, which tends to mean that Michelin is a magnet for all criticism, but also quietly gets forgotten whenever things are going really well, such as the nature of being a one-make tire manufacturer. They get a ton of abuse, and they're always being compared to how better things were in the past.
Yeah,
that's not the case. I mean, the Endurance World Championship was decided on Sunday by Michelin Bridgestone tire, delaminating for championship leaders Yart and essentially costing them the title. So these things, we tend to look back at MotoGP tires, I think, with rose tinted glasses, but Michelin are doing a good job. The rear is exceptional at the minute.
Yeah.
And I think once this tire, people get used to it and it comes into competition, we're going to hear people talking about this being by far and above the best combination of tires we've ever had in motorbike racing.
Yeah, it's a thankless gig, isn't it? The riders have fans, bike brands have fans, tires don't have fans, especially single make tires in any championship. You get a lot of abuse thrown your way. And I do think, generally they've done a good job as MotoGP stewards. I know stewards is another job, by the way.
I was about to say they've done a better job than the MotoGP stewards.
Well, see, there we go. We've added to the. I know. It's fair enough. It is fair enough. Before we get to the other stuff from the test, the less important stuff than the new tire, we've talked a fair bit about this. I am interested to see if the introduction of a new Michelin front that allows you to really hammer it sets up at least a new test. A new exploratory opportunity for World Superbike super dominant man Toprak Razgatlioglu, who is famous for doing weird stuff to the front tire, lifting the rear, putting brake pressure into the front that makes other riders crash, basically, but he does not crash with. We know that Toprak has had his MotoGP test with Yamaha. We know that Yamaha came away from that test thinking, if he's to make it in MotoGP, he needs there needs to be a rebuild job here. Basically, he needs to completely rework his riding style, and it's a long-term thing. And in the end, Yamaha did not take him into the works lineup. What it did was replace Franco Morbidelli, who was always going to get replaced, I think, with Alex Rins, which you would do just in MotoGP. You would do that. But Toprak and his management pretty famously did not take that super well. They don't believe that test was particularly representative. And they've, even while succeeding at BMW, they have been publicly flirting with the idea of MotoGP Go, even as the years tick on. Toprak and Kenan Sofuoglu, his manager, did the funniest thing in management role this year, which is they publicly talked about the idea of tearing up the BMW contract after 1 year into the 2-year contract. BMW, in no uncertain terms, said this is not happening, and they were like, "Oh, okay, sorry." And then he won like 10 races in a row. It's very funny. It's an incredible bit. Simon, do you think there's still time, and especially with this change?
The fundamental problem that he has right now is that this might suit him, and this might be a really good thing. And if this had happened last year, where he was in a position to badger a MotoGP team to let him try it, then that would have been really useful for him and for us. But he's now a BMW rider. There is not yet publicly a BMW MotoGP bike for him to ride. And that's his problem. He can't go and test the Yamaha now to see if this tire works because he's a factory rider contracted to somewhere else. He's made a bit of a rookie error in that regards. What probably makes it worse as well is that he, I would imagine, knows as well as anyone else what this new Michelin tire does feel like, because Michelin's test rider for the developing the new tire is Sylvain Guintoli, whose other job is Toprak's factory BMW World Superbike test rider. So you would imagine that there has been conversations about what this tire feels like, and Sylvain will have told Toprak if Sylvain feels like this would have worked for him. He's told him that. He knows that. But, short of BMW announcing an entry into MotoGP in the very near future, it's very difficult to see a way in which we see Toprak get a chance to ride this tire outside of becoming a MotoGP rider.
Yeah.
And there's maybe, one option on the grid for him for 2026 if Jack Miller ends up on a 1-year deal at Pramac, and there's no factory options.
Yeah.
We are now at the point where if he wants to be a MotoGP rider, it has to happen as a satellite rider. It's just not going to happen as a factory racer.
Yeah, for sure.
There's just too much talent stacked elsewhere.
It's just factories don't take that sort of punt right now with guys who aren't like Moto2 top of the line guys or guys already established.
Even then, as we've seen this year, they haven't taken that punt.
Yeah,
because people like Sergio Garcia has been rejected for Jack Miller.
Yeah, and I do think that even if MotoGP comes up with a MotoGP BMW comes up with a MotoGP prototype bike tomorrow, I don't think it's going to be the bike you want to test a new rider to the category on. Like, I don't think those things come out of the oven like fully representative of what you're going to have.
The one thing that works in their favor is that they will have Guintoli on it as a benchmark, and probably Bradley Smith as well. Yeah. So there are two solid riders, and at the end of the day, you can send Toprak out on it, and you don't expect him to be faster than Marc Marquez. You just expect him to be within an X amount of time of the two people that have raced MotoGP before. The other thing about this front tire, and going back to the current MotoGP grid that I'm a little bit curious about, is what it's going to do for the guys that are in year-old machinery. Because it seems right now like this is something that riders are going to be able to adopt to with riding style. Mm-hmm. And that it's not going to be something that takes like kind of fundamental shifts in how bikes are built. Yeah. So we're not going to see people maybe lose a year the way that we have with, for example, what the new rear tire this season has done to Marco Bezzecchi. But I think at the same time, it's going to Yamaha are in a lucky position that they're going to have 4 bikes next year. Ducati are going to struggle a little bit having less bikes, because I think that all the data that they have going into the new season is going into the company shredder. Like this is going to be fundamentally different enough in how you ride the bike that it's going to cause a bit of a reset, which is a good thing, actually. I think that is another thing that helps the others kind of close up the gap to the red bikes at the front. especially when, essentially everyone has nearly as many bikes as them next year for data gathering. It's going to be, I think, probably a good thing for closing up the constructors race as well.
I mean, you would hope so, but at the same time, had a new rear tire this year that wasn't supposed to be a big change, turned out quite a significant lap time kick, and it's, in the end, Ducati has nailed that transition better than anybody else, it seems.
True.
Time now to tell you about the sponsor of this episode, Grammarly. Do you struggle with when to use fewer instead of less? Do you find yourself writing important emails which, when you look back on them, take far too long to get to the point? Are you guilty of exclamation marks and too much jargon? Well, Grammarly is an AI writing partner that helps you find the words you need and the right text for your context. It learns your personal style and your brand or company style to give you personalised suggestions based on what you're writing and who's going to read it. Grammarly works across all the apps and sites you use, like Word, Google Docs, Pages, Slack, and more, so there's no need to copy and paste. Grammarly works where you work. Smart features like tone suggestions help you navigate even the most difficult work conversations. And what's more, data privacy and security are woven into the foundations of Grammarly. It's the gold standard of responsible AI, with 15 years of best-in-class communication, trusted by tens of millions of professionals and IT departments. So get AI writing support that works where you work. Download Grammarly for free at grammarly.com/podcast. That's GRAMMARLY.com/podcast. Grammarly. Easier said, done.
This episode is supported by Merrill. With a dedicated Merrill advisor, you get a personalized plan for your financial goals. And when plans change, Merrill's with you every step of the way. Go to ml.com/bullish to learn more. Merrill, a Bank of America company. What would you like the power to do? Investing involves risk. Merrill Lynch, Pierce, Fenner & Smith Incorporated, registered broker-dealer. Registered investment advisor. Member SIPC.
This episode of the Race F1 podcast is sponsored by ZBiotics. ZBiotics is an absolute game changer, because if, like me, you're in your mid-40s, having a night out with a few drinks can leave you feeling considerably worse the next day, and you can't bounce back the way you did when you were in your 20s. But with ZBiotics, you don't have to make that choice between having a great night or a great next day. There's a surefire way to wake up feeling fresh after a night of drinking. It's with pre-alcohol. ZBiotics Pre-Alcohol Probiotic Drink is the world's first genetically engineered probiotic. It was invented by PhD scientists to tackle rough mornings after drinking. And in the words of Jennifer Aniston, here's the science bit. When you drink, alcohol gets converted into a toxic byproduct in the gut. And it's this byproduct, not dehydration, that's to blame for your rough next day. Pre-alcohol produces an enzyme to break this byproduct down. So, just remember to make ZBiotics your first drink of the night, drink responsibly, and you'll feel your best tomorrow. Try it for yourself, and you will believe the hype. Go to zbiotics.com/race to learn more and get 15% off your first order when you use RACE at the checkout. ZBiotics is backed with a 100% money-back guarantee, so if you're unsatisfied for any reason, they'll refund your money, no questions asked. That's the letter Z, or Z if like me you're in the UK, BIOTICS.com/race and the code RACE at checkout for 15% off. One last time, zbiotics.com/race.
We answer questions from the Race Members Club in both our post-race podcasts and exclusive bonus podcasts. Here's a little taster of the latest one of those, which comes out this week ahead of Misano 2. If you want to join the Race MotoGP community on Patreon, get your questions answered, and get the exclusive content, we've got a 7-day free trial running on Patreon right now, but get in quick as it's only available until September 19th.
Goose says, new to all this, I don't know if it's the place to ask. Goose, it was the place to ask. Keep asking questions there. With Suzuki having pulled out post-2022, Honda losing 2 massive sponsors in less than a year, Yamaha still struggling, and KTM as a brand struggling financially, I got my what-if thoughts going. What would the grid look like with only 3 manufacturers, or even just European manufacturers? So, Val and Simon, you can both come in on this. Val put his name down first, so he gets the lead. What are the chances, essentially, of us losing more manufacturers, and could MotoGP handle it if we did?
I think not high, and I think yes. that's my two views on it. It doesn't sound like anybody's particularly hesitating about recommitting for the next rule set. Although at the same time, we didn't really see it coming when Suzuki withdrew. So like you never know 100%. It's manufacturers, you know, they're there, and then suddenly boom, and they're gone. But it doesn't sound like there's a huge threat about that, and it doesn't sound like it's massively performance contingent. And I shouldn't say that because it's not fair, and it's not like Honda, Yamaha, Aprilia, and what's the other one? KTM. Jesus, haven't been additive. They've been, it's good. It's good to have 5 different manufacturers, all honestly reasonably competitive, all making this a good show. Would the racing and all around it be meaningfully much, much worse if it was 20 Ducatis of slightly varying specs going at it with independent teams running them? I'm not sure, because the bikes aren't different enough in terms of where they're getting their performance to like really create those seesaw races, one in the corners, one in the straights. You do sort of have everybody run pretty similar, I think. And, independent teams can make for good championships. Like, one-make championships have been pretty good historically. It'll take some of the shine off, for sure. It'll take an important part of the competition away, for sure. We don't want it, but it's survivable in terms of the race that you would put on.
Yeah, I mean, and when you go further back in history as well, it was kind of how it's always been to a large extent. Even through, like the seasons you think of as MotoGP's greats, like the sort of the late 80s, early 90s, you basically have a sea of Yamahas, a sea of Hondas, Schwanson, a Suzuki, and maybe like Lawson and a Kajiva. And everyone else was, was in the same machinery. And that's when there was maybe 40 or 50 people racing in a season in the Premier class. So it's just always been the way that it is, and as long as the sharp end's sharp, we're in a position where Ducati have basically cut back the number of bikes they're supplying at the minute, and are unhappy about having to do so because they have the capability to do more. Would it be the end of the world if we started next season with 4 GP25s, 4 GP22 or 24s, and 4 GP23s in the grid? No, it would actually probably be quite good racing, because those bikes are all fairly well matched, and it would suck from a kind of a wider, World Ducati year perspective.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But it wouldn't be the end of the world. We'd still have a championship, and it will eventually correct itself, as it always does, essentially. And it's worth noting that Suzuki have walked away for complicated reasons that I think we've agreed we are at some point going to explore over winter in the MotoGP on the race YouTube channel. But Honda aren't going anywhere at all. It's not, there will always be racing with Honda.
Okay, so that was a 30-minute segment of the test, but obviously the rest of the test, the riders and teams spent trying out their own stuff. Less important own stuff, what have you. New engines, new fairings, new swing arms, new chassis, what have you. Let's just go through it quickly. There was I believe a new aero package for Ducati that Pecco Bagnaia did not run, but Enea Bastianini and Jorge Martin potentially did. Martin didn't speak to the media after the test. Bastianini
Shocker
did.
That.
And yeah. But yeah, it doesn't sound like they're suddenly favoring those other two over Bagnaia or anything, just a case of personal preference. But it is interesting to see Ducati wheel out, developments and stuff for riders who are leaving at the end of the year. But it is, it's just that it's presumably a short-term thing, you would imagine then.
Yeah,
for personal preference.
My gut feeling is that it's the aero thing is to an extent personal preference.
Yeah,
and that this is just kind of fine-tuning bikes for the rest of the season with something that suits their riding in particular, rather than, is a fundamental change for next year or anything like that. I think one of the most notable things at this test for me was the fact that it really did give a sense of how there is no such thing as a 24 bike and a 25 bike anymore. There's this like constant evolution. And yeah, there will be certain big steps going forward into next season, like homologated engines and stuff like that. But we are seeing bikes now that just evolve week to week, rather than turn up at the start of the year, run that way for the year, and then disappear at the end of it. And that was, I think that was reflected in most people's testing programs, wasn't it?
Yeah, I think so. And I mean, it's the MotoGP that we exist in. There's a 24 and 25 engine for 3 of the 5 manufacturers for the non-concessions rank D manufacturers. And then in terms of the bike, it's just, piecemeal, piece by piece evolution. I mean, some of the biggest changes that we've had recently, they did come in mid-season. Like, remember KTM going from, their standard chassis to the carbon chassis last year. That was in season. That was at the end of the year. But you could say that's a year-on-year step, I guess. Let's go to KTM for a second. So Paul Sparger raced a prototype new bike in Austria and in Misano. Raced it decently enough. Looked good. Looked okay. Yeah. He's rusty, but the proof of some speed was there. They had Brad Binder and Pedro Acosta try it. Well, definitely Brad Binder, but Pedro wasn't really sure. I think what he was trying. He just tried a lot of stuff, or wasn't too forthcoming.
I think Pedro doesn't try to think too much about what he's riding. He just tells them whether or not it's faster or not, which is what a good rider should do, really.
Binder sounded tentatively positive, I think, just generally quite decent about it. So it's not quite the maybe last year's carbon chassis thing of, all right, we were all switching to this immediately. It's more next year, potential base, etc. So we'll see how that progresses through Valencia and into the season. Aprilia, I don't think had much. I mean, it sounded like, on Maverick Vinales' side, and he is leaving. Of course, everybody's leaving, basically. But yeah, on Maverick Vinales' side, worked a lot in the setup to get the bike to stop well. It's all about stopping, basically. The only carryover rider for next year, Ralph Hernandez, I think tried back-to-back in 23 and 24, because we now have a pretty good idea that Aprilia has, there's two bikes, because they actually did have a big year on change. So they have two bikes that are strong in slightly different areas and slightly different tracks. They're at their best. So that made a bit of sense. But yeah, apparently tried a lot there, but nothing that's like an obvious, here's next year's prototype. But that's Aprilia. I don't think we've ever seen Aprilia just wheel out an all new bike out of nowhere in
I think there's
September.
Resource elements related to that where they're just not in a position to do that, especially at this time of the year.
I'm not like 100% sure that would help, I guess, but other teams do it. Before we go to the Japanese manufacturers, there's a lot of talk of an engine freeze right now in MotoGP, and I think I would imagine that can sound a little bit alarming for some of the fans. So I would certainly understand that. Like, oh, look, one manufacturer is winning every Grand Prix this season, basically, but one. Now is the perfect time to freeze specs. I can see how that would be a problematic logic. But Simon, there's a good reason for it beyond just, having to do an all-new bike for 27.
Yeah. So from what I understand, this idea I'm not sure where it's originated from, but it seems to have a fair bit of backing from the manufacturers. I mean, I'd imagine in the vote, it'll only be, we'll see 3 manufacturers voting and 2 abstaining, because at the end of the day, Honda and Yamaha, it doesn't affect them because of their concession status anyway. They'll be allowed to do what they do. But the rumors are that, we'll see something like we did in 2021 when, because of the massive disruption to the 2020 season and then on into 21 from COVID, the engine that they had selected for 20 became the engine for was essentially 18 months of MotoGP, and no one criticized it too much. Everyone was pretty confident that it was the right idea at the time. It seems like the motivation for doing it at the minute is that teams are capable of continuing to develop the 25, 26 bikes while working on the 27 machine with the new 850 engine. Everyone has the resource internally to do that, but what they don't have the resource to do is both of those projects and a third project, which is essentially converting MotoGP to fully synthetic sustainable fuel. Because from 2027, we go from the current 40% to 100% sustainable fuel as well, which is going to alter the balance of it's going to change how things work in the engines, essentially. It is very similar to petrol, but it's not quite petrol. It's tunable, which is something that we've never really seen before. It adds another way to kind of tune your bike's performance, and that's something that they'll all want to exploit. So as a result, it seems that factories who have maybe, for example, the engineering teams and the dyno space to do 2 different engine projects at once have said, we can't do 3. Can we like dial this back for now so that we can start working in the future fully? So yeah, it sounds like an idea that's got legs. It makes a lot of sense, and it might be that it doesn't particularly suit Ducati too much as is anyway, because in the grand scheme of things, engine isn't where they're strong anymore. It used to be, but it's not anymore, to the extent that actually at the test, Ducati riders were making jokes about the speed of like the Honda in a straight line, and just how it was slow everywhere else. So it's an interesting idea. It makes a lot of sense. Let's see what happens over the next few weeks, whether or not something comes from that.
I mean, there's a couple of ways to view it, obviously, because any such decision needs unanimous approval. So if you see KTM and Aprilia sign up for it, then what that potentially tells you, one, is they don't believe a performance differentiator is really there in terms of the engine. Like, they believe they can afford that and still fight for something meaningful in 25 and 26. A slightly more skeptical mind could also say it could be two. It could be a business decision where, like, we're not catching in the next 2 years Ducati anyway, so might as well just freeze development right now and focus resources and not get into a spending race that will bring MotoGP nothing new over the next 2 years. I don't really think that's the case, because I don't expect KTM would sign up for that. Aprilia, okay, maybe. KTM, I don't think so, but KTM's engine already pretty great as far as we know, at least in terms of top end grunt, because obviously there's other arguably even more important characteristics for an engine, but what's easiest to judge is the top speed, speed trap numbers, and those have been good for KTM. Aprilia, not so much, but it's it's got other good things about it, and it doesn't sound like they feel they've made like a big engine homologation error or anything like that. We'll see what the exact mechanism is. We'll see when it kicks in. Also makes a bit of sense to me, yeah, in terms of a freeze. Ducati, of course, I think they'd freeze the whole bike right now if they could get away with it very happily. Freeze it for everybody involved, including have the rest of the grid run GP22s or whatever. Let's go to Honda and Yamaha for a second. Let's start with Honda. It's supposed to be a big test at Misano. I think we're noticing a few patterns for the riders in terms of how happy they are with stuff going on. Generally, that's my feeling anyway. I don't think Luca Marini has been like meaningfully unhappy all season.
Yeah,
which is it's quite impressive for a guy who stepped off of a Ducati that was doing good stuff and has stepped on a Honda that is not competitive, is not allowing him to fight for positions in the top 10 even. And again, at Misano in the test, he was like, they've brought the new aero in, and I like it. It's good. It's a meaningful step. Luca is a subscriber to the theory that most modern MotoGP is aero anyway, so that's where Honda needs to step in, because that's the big performance differentiator. I don't know if that's true or not. I know Luca's a smart bloke, so he pays a lot of attention to that sort of stuff. I think Johan Zarco was pretty happy with it too. I think Taka Nakagami tried it. I believe was also reasonably satisfied. I could be lying on that last one, but I hope not. It's been a week.
That's a fair assessment.
So, yeah. There's one person who was unhappy, not with the aero. The aero was fine, but just the fact that the aero was the headline item didn't really satisfy him. Joan Mir.
Yeah.
Doesn't sound thrilled.
No, he was really unhappy. They've been talking for a while about a big step that was due to come here, and the suggestion was that essentially the big step was going to be a whole new motorbike, something that was really revolutionary, different, and it wasn't. To be honest, it was quite flat. It was a very moderate improvement, if it was an improvement at all. It was a very moderate, thinking and difference. It wasn't the radical change, and this is essentially the last time that they have any time at all, even with all their private testing, to try anything this side of Valencia. And Mir was pretty vocal in his frustrations about, how he kind of felt like they hadn't delivered what they'd promised him, which is quite strange, really, because Joan Mir hasn't misunderstood what Honda have been telling him about what was coming here. He's a super clever guy. There's not been a communication issue here where he's felt for 1 second like there was something coming, that everyone in Honda have looked at his comments afterwards and said, what was he saying that for? That's crazy talk. We never implied that. Which means I would imagine something has gone wrong somewhere, or something that was supposed to happen hasn't, and it's going to make Valencia test even more important for Honda, I guess.
Yeah, he's just been ever since the shine of the new bike wore off very quickly heading into the season, he's just been a pretty unhappy presence publicly.
Apart from that 1 week where he signed a new 2-year contract.
Yeah, but even, honestly, even then, sort of, like, there's always been the undertone of, I signed this because that's what I've got on the table, and all the other stuff on the table is, like, satellite rides for a fraction of the money. Presumably, he never said this publicly, but I think that's the interpretation that we're... Yeah. I don't know. It's kind of a strange situation. I agree, but we've seen lead Honda riders. If Joan Mir is that right now, which I think Johan Zarco would argue, maybe not.
Yeah, Zarco's not wearing factory colors though.
Yeah, but we've seen lead Honda riders be pretty unhappy by what Honda brought to the Misano test. That ended very well last season.
True.
Yeah, Yamaha. Fabio Quartararo is, sort of his usual stance. Didn't sound too perturbed, but I mean, they asked him about the engine he was trying, and he said it's not better right now, but the implication was that it can be meaningfully better with a fair amount of work to it. So he wasn't, there wasn't particular discontent coming out of there. Alex Rins was very, very positive with the engine he ran, which also might be the engine he ran at Aragon, but not at Misano.
It might be, but who knows anymore?
Yeah, for whatever reason.
They're throwing a lot of resources at this.
I mean, ultimately, when you give teams unlimited engine development under ranked D concession, apparently they just bring completely new configurations every other weekend and mix and match them during the weekend, and during the test they just run
everything,
like infinite amounts of them. Yeah. I've read somewhere like 7, he said, or something like that, which it's probably hard to keep track of. But I think he said something like that he gained half a second on race pace.
Yeah.
Alex Rins' race pace has not been good this season, so we'll see what that means for Quartararo, because I imagine they're talking about the same engine. It would be very strange if they were working on completely different engine specs and engine configurations. But, it'll be a while until we get like proper clarity on that. Yamaha's test program this season, of course, compromised by the fact that Cal Crutchlow is still recovering from the infection he had after the surgery on his
arm pump on his
Yeah. So we'll see. I mean, they're moving along. They'll be happy with what happened at Misano. Misano 2 will be an interesting test because there's a lot of data everybody has now from Misano. So we'll see what happens to that Yamaha baseline competitiveness of Misano 1 once everybody has run the track a million times with these bikes, even more so than usual. If Yamaha drops back, then we'll know it's the build-up of info from the test they had before. Mm-hmm. If Yamaha doesn't drop back, then it's it's for real. It's what they've got.
And they were pretty confident over the race weekend, weekend 1, that it wasn't anything to do with the test. So let's see.
Yeah, exactly.
Curious to see how that one plays out.
This episode is supported by Merrill. With a dedicated Merrill advisor, you get a personalized plan for your financial goals. And when plans change, Merrill's with you every step of the way. Go to ml.com/bullish to learn more. Merrill, a Bank of America company. What would you like the power to do? Investing involves risk. Merrill Lynch, Pierce, Fenner & Smith Incorporated, registered broker-dealer. Registered investment advisor. Member SIPC.
George Clooney and Brad Pitt's new movie Wolves is on Apple TV Plus September 27th.
That's where I want you to be now.
So if you want to see George Clooney and Brad Pitt, go to Apple TV Plus.
You got to start the story there.
Or if you want to see Brad Pitt and George Clooney, go to Apple TV Plus.
I am enjoying the show.
And if you want to see their new movie Wolves,
you can't do it, I'm going to help you out. I can do it, so do it.
Definitely go to Apple TV Plus.
Admit it is cool. Okay, fine, it was very cool.
Wolves, streaming September 27th on Apple TV Plus. Rated R.
When it comes to towing, seeing is believing. That's why Chevy Truck's advanced camera technology offers up to 8 available cameras for 14 unique views, so you can focus on the view that really matters. Chevrolet, together let's drive. Learn more about Chevy Trucks at Chevy.com. Safety or driver assistance features are no substitute for the driver's responsibility to operate the vehicle in a safe manner. Read the Vehicle Owner's Manual for important feature limitations and information.
And one more thing from the test, one that's potentially least important for competition's sake, but maybe most important for the TV product thing. The radio testing, that's, pit to bike. How do I describe it? Race control to bike, pit to bike, bike to pit. radio continues to be tested. Before we go into the merits of that as a project, just to update on the test, this is not the first time they've done it. It won't be the last time, I presume, that they've done it, because it's still not entirely ready yet. Fabio Quartararo's feedback is, on the straights, can't hear nothing because of the bike obviously making sounds. Great description, Val, very technical, but yeah. And into the corners, bike isn't making sound so much, so you can hear it, but you do not want to be talking or hearing people talk into the corner, which, makes a ton of sense. Obviously, in Formula One, where there is already team radio, they talk on the straights. They do not talk in the braking zones. That's a big, big, big no-no. So they need to figure out how to make that viable. It sounds like, it's still a gradual process. At the same time, there has been reporting, I believe, from motorsport.com Spain, that they are potentially planning a full-on introduction in 2025. I think beginning with race control messaging, which I would get as a priority, because that's not like an entertainment value thing, that's a safety thing. At the same time, I think once it works, I imagine Dorna will just be happy to insert it into action immediately. Again, in terms of regulatory stuff, things in MotoGP happen like this. Once an idea caught on, it just happens. Simon, do you think it's ready?
I don't think it'll ever be ready. I think it's a completely pointless exercise. And I think that Dorna are only doing it because they see F1 getting social media clips, views from posting chunks of race control messages or radio messages. I actually think rather than being like a safety thing, I think this is the opposite. I think it's dangerous. I think that it's been poorly executed and rushed through. And I think it's a very cynical thing to be doing. We all know that the only reason that they're doing it with race control first is because that's the way that they plan to introduce it to the riders and ease it in. The riders are not particularly comfortable with it, with how it's being executed. It either doesn't work half the time, or they can't hear it, or it comes at the wrong time. If this was genuinely about alerting riders about hazards, then there are other things that we should be doing considerably faster than that. Like, for example, right now, whenever they send dash messages with yellow flags and stuff like that, it only counts for the sector that the rider's in, as opposed to the piece of track or the corner that they're in. If you wanted to genuinely do something that would be much more visible to the rider and much more noticeable and safer, fix that first, which is what makes me think that this is just they're using safety as a cynical way to get into racing. I don't have strong messages or strong feelings one way or another about the strategy side of it.
Mm-hmm.
I just don't think that it's something that's needed in MotoGP. I don't think it's something that we particularly have to be doing. I think we're only doing it because F1 does it. And then above and beyond that, I have really serious questions to ask about the safety implications of it, because this has not been, the only rider to raise this on Monday after the test, and credit to him, was the rookie, was Pedro Acosta. This has not been done with the helmet technician or with the helmet manufacturers working closely with them to make it happen. So we're adding something inside a helmet that's not designed to be there, and everyone's just okay with that right now. Like, how? Because, we know from other tragic cases in other parts of motorsport what happens when you, for example, stick a GoPro mount onto a helmet and add a hard surface that you can hit. It's not what helmets, it's not designed to be there. And I really don't understand how that's kind of been given a bit of a let's not worry about it right now approach so far. And I'm quite glad that Pedro Acosta spoke out about it actually during the test, because I don't like it. It worries me.
Yeah, it's an extra item.
It's something that's not designed to be there,
Yeah.
For the same reason that that I don't like the shoulder camera, because it means that suddenly there's a 2 kilo chunk of metal sitting in the between a rider's shoulder blades.
Yeah.
Inside the suit to make it all work. I see lots of issues with this in the future. I think we're in very dangerous territory, and I don't think that the powers that be have fully considered the real implications of it.
Yeah, obviously, MotoGP riders take slightly more hits to the head than Formula One drivers by the nature of the sport.
Mm-hmm.
We don't talk much about concussions in F1, even though there's a whole own thing going on there actually. But in MotoGP, it's a more pressing concern.
Yeah,
I do kind of get the they're saying they're introducing it to safety. I do get the appeal of that. It would be better if the yellow flag rules were more stringent, but it's also ideally pumping that info straight to the subject rather than relying on them seeing a light panel or relying on them looking into the dashboard, whatever. I think there's a lot of value to that. And I think being specific with that messaging, it's not just a yellow flag, even though just ideally you just have everybody slow down for a yellow flag. But it's also true that in most motorsports, slowing down for a yellow flag, maybe they don't slow down enough sometimes because the race is still expected to carry on. So you can only slow down so much.
I think one of my other concerns is how it's going to work during a race when there's maybe 20 seconds separating the grid.
Yeah.
Are they going to be able to send messages to specific riders?
Yeah.
To say, as say someone crashes on turn 6 and there's a bike in the middle of the track, are they going to be able to send that message to riders as they approach turn 6?
Yeah.
Or are they going to be able to send it to the entire, are they going to have to send it to the entire grid at once, which means that some people won't hear it. Some people will be braking for a corner when someone starts shouting in their ear. It feels like a really, really rushed implication or implementation of the system so far, because we don't have answers to any of those questions. And I don't think that many people are thinking about those questions.
Yeah, ideally, I think if they do introduce it, you would want to have a demo, like a pair of headphones that you put on media members to show, this is what it sounds like, this is how it kicks in, etc., etc.
But you'd also have to put us in the back of a motorbike to have the full experience of the day, or just when we're recording the podcast, just expect people to randomly start shouting in our ear, red flag, and not miss our train of thought.
Yeah.
To try and, you know what I mean? It's a really tricky thing to bring in out of nowhere.
Yeah, we miss our trains of thought without any interruption.
Exactly.
By ourselves.
Exactly.
Let's also, you've touched upon the race strategy thing of it, because I think, if they do make it work conceptually, if it can be done safely, then obviously the next step after the race control messaging will be team to bike to team, and that eliminates the issue of, who do you pump it in and what timing, because you're not going to be race control looking at 20 bikes at the same time. You're a team looking at 2 bikes.
Well, it doesn't, because you still want race control to have that safety control aspect of it.
Yes. Yeah.
So that confuses things.
Yeah. I mean,
then suddenly you've got 2 different voices shouting in your ear at once.
Which is true. Yes, that is true. There's probably a way Formula 1 doesn't have race control.
Race control don't have the ability to speak to them.
Yeah, but
they can
other
to the team bosses.
Other car racing series, I think. I don't know if they talk to drivers or teams. That's interesting. I should look into that, because I'm pretty sure I've heard messaging to drivers from race control, but I'm not sure if they were just the teams and teams relayed them. I'm not sure if teams will have the final say on what gets into their riders' ears. I presume not in this case, but I'm not sure if that's how it normally works. But yeah, as a strategy thing, I think the big argument was, well, this could ruin, for instance, this would prevent Martin from doing what he was doing, which, by the way, I'm not convinced at all. I'm not convinced even a little bit. Either. Yeah. But let's say it did. Flag-to-flag races aren't common enough for me to really be worried about that. And I think if you take that away with a bit more team info, ideally you do not want riders to have an abundance of info. You do not want them coached through the lap. Again, I say that I don't really care, but there's people who care. But in flag to flag with weather and stuff, at a certain point it's not really a question of skill when you pit or you don't. What's the skill? You look at clouds and you try to ascertain what happens.
It's just going to be 21 team bosses screaming, just do what Marc Marquez does every time there's a flag-to-flag race. That's we don't have a lot of strategy in MotoGP. No. That's the reality, especially stuff that can be coached. Yeah. I mean, outside of flag-to-flag races, how many times in the last 10 years, can you think of a position? It's basically, it's flag to flag races and team orders.
Yeah.
That's it. And team orders happen once every 3 seasons.
Yeah. And I mean, the question then is, what are they actually going to discuss? And I think the only answer to that possibly in the F1 radio messages that do go viral, apart from the messages of the driver telling the team to please go away, stop talking to me, which is quite common,
yes,
are the messages of, well, that guy just did something illegal next to me, or that guy crashed into my car and I'm going to call him every bad word in the book that I know, which is kind of what MotoGP wants, I suspect here. It wants riders to call each other names.
Yeah.
Yes. Let me be clear. 100% great idea. I'm totally up for that. Because right now that's our job, is to go into the media scrums and get them to call each other names. I know that doesn't sound good. That's a very sad view of journalism, and that's obviously a very small part of it, but it is a meaningful part of it. It's getting writers to tell us what they actually think of the other guy. It will never be more accurate as to what they actually thought in the moment. You know, you'll hear journalists ask, "What did you think in that moment? What was going through your head?" Team radio answers that question very well, very quickly.
I mean, in that case, essentially, what you've hit upon, Val, is that we don't need MotoGP team radio. We need MotoGP TV direction to have live microphones inside riders' helmets at all times. That's all it needs.
I think that's true.
That's all it needs.
I think that's really... I mean, is it going to turn into lobbying race control for penalties and like dobbing people in for exceeding track limits? Yes, it
absolutely will. There will be people that absolutely do that, as you know. And then there'll be the Johan Kimi Zarco of the grid, where he's just telling everyone to shut up and let him do his thing.
And it is. I get it. I get wanting it. I get how, in theory, there's a good concept here. You know, ultimately what MotoGP wants more than anything is to try to convey its rider's character, and to make him further stars of the show. There's going to be a small problem here where they're all going to speak Spanish or Italian, so enjoy that. What are you going to do about that for worldwide broadcast? Are you going to have an auto translation service running in the background? Are you going to have AI translate the message and then recreate their voice? Please don't. No. Well, they're clearly not going to do that. But they can't. F1 mandates radio communication in English. You must do it. You have to do it. Otherwise, it's a breach. MotoGP would be... I think it would be impossible to do that.
It would improve the standard of English across the MotoGP grid if they were to do that. So I don't see a particular problem there. There's a few people could benefit from being told they have to speak English more often in the MotoGP paddock.
Would only improve the swearing.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. And that's all we want, Val.
Anyway, we're going to talk about this more, I'm sure, because we're going to have a better idea of what's actually happening besides, a few riders carrying out a few tests. In Misano, it was Fabio Quartararo, Aleix Espargaro, Lorenzo Savadori trying out the radio system. I'm not sure there was anyone else to anybody's knowledge. I presume, if introduction is fast-tracked, then everybody's going to have, a radio attached to their helmets in Valencia testing or whatever, or in preseason testing. 2025 seems like very soon, very early. But I also should say, I think this is in some way the future. Like one day you will have it in some form, because one day you just, you want to have the sportsman tracked at basically every moment in time. You'll have a camera everywhere and you'll have a microphone everywhere, and that will include inside the helmet as technology evolves. Let's hope we get there the right way. That's all I can say on that regard right now. And Simon, of course, you don't feel right now is quite the right way.
Yeah, I think that's fair.
Thank you for being here with us for this Mattless episode. Again, Matt will be back shortly. It's interesting to do it with just two people. It makes it a bit of a weird fireside chat. Not quite podcasty, but, nice every once in a while. Fun, interesting. I should duck out for one of these too, let you guys have a conversation that isn't dominated by my incessant voice. But in the meantime, we've got a lot of stuff going on at the race. We're pushing on with the early days of the YouTube channel, which is quite an undertaking and quite something new for both of us, but seems to be going okay. Quite happy with it. And obviously there's going to be lots of stuff on the race website before, during, and after the upcoming Emilia-Romagna Grand Prix weekend. Why did I do that with the R's on that? It's not French words.
Yeah. You almost went Spanish there and rolled your R's. You've been listening to too much Marc Marquez MotoGP radio in your dreams.
This is why Matt does this. This is he's next time there's going to be contract negotiations or whatever. He's going to play this clip. He's going to be like, this is what it looks like when I'm not around to do these episodes. Thank you very much, and see you hopefully this time next week.
The Athletic.
College football is back like never before. I'm David Ubben, and I host Until Saturday, the Athletics Leveled Up College Football Podcast. 3 times a week, you'll hear me and my co-hosts, fellow Athletics senior writer Chris Vanini and 2-time national champion Damian Harris, embrace the sport's new madness with you. We're also just going to have a ton of fun enjoying all the things that make college football great. Check out the brand new Until Saturday every Monday, Wednesday, and Thursday this fall. You can find us wherever you listen to your podcasts.